everybody. Hi, Glenn. Hi, Nikori. And everyone else, how are we all doing? Time for another weekly stream to go through some community work. Let's check out some amazing art that people have been working on and give some feedback while we're at it. Hey, Brandom. Okay. Where is my pen? Yeah, I hope everyone's week has been going fantastic. I've had a pretty good one myself. Been very productive. Been working a little bit on the community itself, like on the community Discord. And done a lot of productive stuff on the website front as well. Is super exciting for like something that we've been working on for a while, which is coming together, which I'm freaking excited about. Where is my pen? Oh, there it is. There it is. Hey, Puns! I'm doing great. Thank you so much for asking. Hi, Giovani! I hope you are both doing well as well. Well, all of you. Brandom, Puns, Giovani, I hope you're all doing well. Giovani! Right on time, because we're gonna start out with you, buddy. Make sure that the brush is set up. There we go. Okay, so. What is that? Ooh. Stuff on the left is a reference. Giovanni kindly added that in there so that we can have a good look at it. Oh, you literally just posted like a new one. Not making it easy for me, huh, Giovanni? Let's have a look. Okay, let's get this guy in here. Cool. Okay, so we have the latest now. No, we have the latest. It's all good. Okay, so let's have a look at the Discord. I like some opinions on the lighting and the colors, but love some other generic feedback as well. Lighting and the colors. Yeah, I feel like they're quite similar, right? In terms of like lighting, it feels like you did a good job. The only thing that I would really say is the windows, right? They're currently unlit, which kind of adds like this nice contrasting element within the scene where you have like all the bluish pinkish colors, and then you have like the oranges, which kind of like add like interesting bits to the scene, right? So that would be like the first thing that really stands out to me, like the lit windows. Puns is asking, what are my plans for the weekend? Are you going to play any games? Probably. Just gonna continue playing some WoW, probably. But yeah, I think the lit windows definitely make a difference, right? They definitely add like a little pop of like contrasting color, which is nice. Let's see. Same here, right? Like these windows as well. The rest of it feels good. Feels good in terms of lighting and the mood. I feel like the main thing with the lighting is probably like the background, right? That it has this kind of like yellowish bloom going on. Like feels really nice, where that is the stuff that you're kind of lacking. So background bloom, I will say. Probably number 2 when it comes to lighting, right? A couple of other things that I kind of wanted to point out is that there are like a lot of opportunities here to do a little bit of extra things with the environment, right? What I mean by that is if you look at the canopy here, right? Like your canopy compared to the one that is to the left, right? You already tried to do stuff here, which is pretty good. Like look at how much character this one has. Like it really has like this strong bend in it, and then like all this stuff is kind of like overlaid like in the weird positions. And you can really drive that home, right? Like add more character to it. Like what also helps with stuff like this is not working with the same panels, right? But also having just like a big chunk of wood, which then is like slightly thicker, and then have like a thin panel that sticks over. It's like a little bit longer than the rest of it. Maybe it's a little bit at an angle. You know, like all this kind of stuff, like make it look like really nice. You can also do the same thing here with the roof as well. Like the roof, what I'm always looking for is straight lines and how to kill them, right? Because I don't like straight lines. So this one would be quite nice for like a sagging roof, right? And then do the same thing with the paneling, right? Like have one panel stick out, like one panel is normal, have like another one stick out, stuff like that, right? And give like each an individual panel like a little bit of like a curved edge or something like that to kind of make it stand out, you know? Especially the ones where it's like it still feels like it's just like a block of geometry, right? You can really make them stand out if you just add like a little bit more to them. Right, and give them some thickness, like have them in different lengths. Let's see. Yeah, also the buildings on the left, they feel pretty good, right? Oh wait, let me make notes here, right? So one is add character, right? Especially for the silhouettes. Still don't know how to spell that word, but that's fine. And then number 2 is focus on empty areas. So for example, like these buildings, they feel like really empty compared to the buildings on the left. Like the buildings on the left, they start to have like, they have like the paneling going on. They have like the warping going on, like the the corrugated metal sheets, you know, like they get like a nice amount of layering. Where the building on the right, in contrast, they kind of feel empty. So it just really stands out, especially in comparison with the two. And then just to come back to number one as well, adding character, for example, the car here, right? Because it's such a big foreground element. Try to replicate what's happening here, right? Like it's a very, very weird and like dynamic kind of looking car, whereas yours is just like it's too blockish, right? Like it's almost just like a cube. So what I would do with that shape is I would just take it as it is now, and just do like a soft selection and just start like pulling it and pushing it until it looks like really interesting. It's like a minute of work, right? But that sort of thinking can be applied to like a lot of shapes here. For example, this one, right? Do the same thing here. Do the same sort of warping on like a lot of things in this scene, and it's gonna look way nicer. Then I think the last one, I'll add like a cheeky number 3 on here before we move on. Is the background. The background of the concept kind of has like this nice kind of layering, right? Where you have like a mountain in the back, and then you kind of see like different skyscrapers in the back. Kind of adding like a bit more depth to like the whole scene. Could be really interesting to like integrate in your project as well. Especially, again, this stuff, they're just blocks, right? They're just cubes. Maybe with like other cubes on them that have like a different color, just to simulate that they have windows on them. But you can get away with like really simple stuff at this distance. Yeah, filling the background out is going to be nice as well. Yeah, let me see. Because you were asking lighting and colors. I think they're good. I've been straying a bit far from the concept. But I'll also leave it here just if you wanted to compare. Yeah. Yeah, no. I think that's all that I really have to say, right? Because also you're trying to finish this off this week. I'm trying to stick with the easy things, right? Or like the things that are achievable within that week as well. So I would say good luck and keep me up to date. All right. That was already really helpful. Yeah, happy to help, and thank you so much for posting your work as well, Giovani. That was cool. Okay. Moving on up. We're going to jump to Lina Vola. If that is your name. I think so. Let's see. Let's have a look. Where's the entry? Magic Garden Shed. Hello, I believe I'm almost finished with the environment around the bonsai tree. Okay. I still need to texture the plants and replace the block out windows and souls. Block out windows and souls. Think the window frames, right? And I would like to ask for feedback specifically regarding the vegetation and atmosphere of the environment. But you just said that I still need to texture the plants, right? So it kind of doesn't matter what we have to say about the plants too much. Let me see. The atmosphere of the environment. I feel like the atmosphere is coming together. What I kind of want to see with the atmosphere, if I were to approach this, is something more like warm tones, right? Like something that has like a bit of warmth to it. Like warm or cozy or something like that. So in terms of the atmosphere, more warm plus cozy. It's mostly warm. But the reason why I say this as well is just because there's a lot of green here. And if you think about like contrasting colors, right? Is that you have green versus orange, and like they always like fit nicely, right? So I think what I would change the sun color to be like more orangey, right? You don't have to push it too far, but just get like some orange stuff in there. That could already like start bouncing off of like all the green elements there. Kind of like the pottery is doing already, right? Like it gets like a nice contrast between the colors. Yeah, what I would also do is contrast, right? It's something that we probably talked about before, but I would try to contrast, especially the foreground a little bit more. Because the foreground, like these elements, right? Like these elements, they feel really well lit compared to the rest of the environment. It almost feels like we're getting like a directional light from the back of us, like shining into the scene. Whereas you could easily, let's actually do like a little comparison here, right? So if we duplicate this, if we then go in and we say, I don't know, don't want to do it that way. Turn the midtones a little bit. Right, and I'm kind of, when I'm doing this stuff, I'm forcefully trying to put the midtones in as well. I'm doing this with the intent to put more focus on like the main component of the scene, right? So if we then take this guy back, you can kind of see what that does, right? So we're pulling more focus towards like the central component of your scene. We're giving it a little bit of focus point, right? So that's what I'm trying to achieve here when I do this little pass. Yeah, that's in terms of atmosphere, right? I think having like a contrasting color in there is gonna help a lot already, especially when it comes to the light. Let's have a look. Let's continue reading as well. So that was a little bit about the atmosphere, right? Like how you can push like the color contrast between the two, and how you can also increase like the contrast just a little bit, you know? It doesn't have to be as much as I did here, but you can definitely use that to your advantage and make it look good. And then I think, honestly, let's have a look. You could even like push the colors just in general, right? This obviously has to be balanced whenever you're doing the lighting pass and you're putting in like that orange light, right? That we kind of talked about. So do that first before you start pushing the saturation of the scene itself, because that's obviously going to have an impact. But that can also really help, because I think what you're trying to go for is something that feels like cozy and like warm and like wholesome, right? Just because like that seems to be like the whole setup here. So I'm also trying to emphasize that with the colors as well, and like really trying to bring them out and bring everything come to life. So we could add that to the list as well. or saturation. I'm uncertain about the placement of my pillows, books, and flowers. I feel like giving them red, yellow, and orange colors could prevent everything from looking too green or brown. However, it seems a little bit distracting now. Do you think you have too much or too little color variation? How would you approach this? So it's the same thing, really, right? But what you're doing, the same thing as we've done before, right? Where you selectively start choosing which thing you're gonna focus on, right? So you overemphasize the middle, or like you emphasize the middle and you desaturate like the rest of the things. You can kind of do that inside of your materials as well, where, and this is more something that comes later down the line, right? But let's say you have like a bunch of pillows that are like bright red. What you then do is turn the saturation down on those compared to your focal point. And that's something that you can play around with, right? Like inside of Unreal Engine, if you go to your texture settings, let's say you have all your pillows on one atlas, right? What you could do in your texture settings is you could go to your texture, scroll all the way down, like in the details panel, and it has like controls. So you can change the saturation like inside of Unreal Engine and do that per texture basis. So you could tweak it on the fly there if you wanted to. Or if you want to do that in like a material, you can also do it that way. But in that way, what you can actually do is have more control over the saturation. Now, when it comes to the actual colors of the pillows, what I would probably go for is something that kind of breaks up the scene, right? Because right now you have a lot of green and you're also introducing like a lot of orange too, right? Like oranges and browns, that sort of stuff. So what could be really interesting is if you then think about, let's say blue pillows. Blue pillows, right? Or what were you saying? Red, yellow, and orange? Like I would go for possibly like a blue and yellow. So that you're getting like dashes of color inside of your environment, but you just need to keep in mind that you need to balance them at the end of when everything in your scene is done. So try adding like blue and yellow ones and then balance at the end. Because I think what you're pointing out is right? Like if you were to add like red, yellow, and orange colors like from the pillows, then it would be a bit too much. So you need like something that's a little bit different to kind of break it up and add like different colors into the scene. So I would say, to answer your question, I think you might have too little color variation at the moment. But yeah. That's the way that I would approach it as well. It's something that you'll have to feel out for yourself too, right? Like if you feel that like, something is not right, like experiment. What usually is like a good way of approaching experimentations, right? Like if you're uncertain about something in your scene, like the thing that you shouldn't do is like keep doing small tweaks until it hopefully works. Like you should immediately try doing like the thing that is probably like the craziest thing out there and then dial it back to where it needs to be. So for example, that's where the blue comes in, right? Try a blue pillow. See how that looks, because it might just work out, and if it doesn't, like try something else, right? Like try a different color that probably works a little bit better as well. Would playing around, so Brandom is asking a question in the chat as well. So would playing around with some color settings in the post-process volume help? It would, but that's really dangerous when you do that when you're still working on the texture for an asset. Because what you're going to be doing at that stage is you're going to be tweaking your post-process volume to make certain things stand out or not stand out, right? But if if you then still have to do like a bunch of textures after that pass, then what you're going to be doing is then you have to like balance the textures for your post-processing volume again. So it's kind of like you should minimize. What's the best way of saying it? Like you should minimize how many levers you're pulling at one point, because the more different things that you're going to be playing around with, like the more difficult it's going to be for you to have like consistent control over everything. But it is a good suggestion. I would just do that at the end when you know that like all your textures are like consistent with each other, and then doing like a post-process volume pass. Best to save it at the end. Yep. Exactly. Maybe, so McVal is saying maybe adding some flowers or other colors to the vines on the wall could help as well. Yeah. That could definitely be worth trying out. I think try it out, right? I think from a gut feeling, I think it would be actually like really nice to have most of the differentiation in color just be focused around this area. Then having like this, almost like this green barrier, right? And then maybe having like additional pops of color up here with like little flowers or stuff. The reason why I also say this, and this is something that I wanted to bring up as well, is that the ivy right now is also really, really dense. I would probably go for like a less is more approach. For the ivy at the moment, because it just feels like it's just like massive clumps of ivy. But that's not really what ivy is, right? Like if you really look at ivy, like it looks really dense, but like all the individual leaves are still trying to get as much sunlight as they get, right? So it's actually really interesting if you then were to cut down like literally half or maybe like 60% of these leaves, the ivy would actually come more into play because you would actually see more of the shapes and it wouldn't be so noisy. So that's why less is more. Hey, hey, excited for all the whips. Oh yeah. Yeah, we got some good ones as every week. Let's see. It would be nice to get some light coming between the leaves around the window frame. Yeah, that could be an interesting one. It depends on the lighting angle. It definitely does depend, right? It's a good suggestion though. Let me continue reading here. So I'm also seeking feedback on the background behind the windows. Do you have any advice on how to make it more interesting but not distracting? So I think with this one, actually, again, I'm purely thinking about colors, right? Because shapes are not going to be emphasized. So I'm thinking about colors. What if you have something blue in the background, right? Because now the whole scene is green, but the background is green as well, so we don't have that separation between the two layers anymore. What I would probably do instead of adding like foliage behind it is maybe try making it just sky, so that you could almost imagine that this is like a wizard tower or something like that, right? Like high up in the clouds. Maybe add like a cloud or two in there. Just something very subtle, but something very contrasting, right? So that we get the contrast between the green and the blue, instead of adding more green in the background. Because you kind of want to have this you kind of want to make it almost feel like this place, the interior of this place, is so well protected, and it's all about like growing plants, that the contrast between the two would be like really interesting to showcase. So that's what I would do. But you can do something else as well, right? I think the most important one is that the background is not green. Because that's why I'm saying like maybe clouds or clouds in sky, you know? So that we get like separation, color separation between the two. Okay, let's have a look. Maybe more of a general question, but is there something crucial that disturbs you when you look at my environment? Oh, yeah. This is the thing that I already... I mean, it's not disturbing, right? But I already talked about the ivy, right? I think the ivy is probably like... It's just way too noisy for what you're trying to achieve with your scene at this moment. So just cutting like the amount of ivy, like the individual planes, like by 60%, maybe even 70%, is gonna help a lot. But we can actually see like maybe some of the vines from the ivy as well, right? Like it doesn't have to be a lot, but just cutting it down to to actually giving shape to the ivy, right? And making it seem like, again, less is more. That's what I'm aiming for there. Because the rest of your scene is like nicely placed. It doesn't seem to have like a lot of noise going on, but then the ivy is like very heavy on the eyes, right? It's trying to attract like a lot of attention to itself by just the amount of it, and then also maybe a little bit of the color variation between them as well. But that's mainly, like, that's mostly the main thing that I wanted to bring up. I think you do have to experiment a little bit more with the lighting. But I can see that you're trying stuff, right? Like from the previous post as well. So you're trying stuff out. Stuff is coming together, so I like what I'm seeing in the iterations. Yeah, I would say keep that up. Keep up experimenting. Keep up the way that you're approaching the scene now. And yeah, I'm looking forward to more updates. Sia saying, I love this piece so much. Yes, it's so good. It has a lot of potential, right? Like, I feel like every update, like, stuff is coming together, and it's nice to see like the growth that people are putting in their work, right? It's just nice to see it like grow consistently. It's super cool. All right, McFell. Brandom is saying great work to you too, Lina Vola. So great job, McFell. Let's have a look. Let's get some context as well. Cyberpunk apartment that we looked at last week. I love what you're doing. I think it's a great choice of thematics. Like there's a real thematic clash that in like a cyberpunk world where everything is commercialized, right? That there's still a person trying to paint like paintings. I think that's really interesting. Potential thoughts on the camera angles. They didn't change, right? Compared to last time? Oh, sorry. Yeah, the desk one changed. The other one didn't really, right? I don't think so. At least from what I can tell. Might be wrong. Yeah, let's have a quick look. So again, like I was saying before, like an interesting clash of cyberpunk versus art, right? I love the thematic clash here. That's really interesting. I think honestly you could like increase the amount of art that's like on the walls and like on the walls and like all over the place, right? Like make it really feel like this is like a painter's studio, right? Where there's like a lot of chaos. Maybe there's like paintings on the floor as well. So you could really drive that home. What you also need to be careful of is that we have a light that's coming here, right? But where's that light coming from? Right? It doesn't seem to have like any physical semblance of where that is coming from. That's always something that the light is placed in the LED above the TV. You're trying to say that this white light is being projected from a yellow tube, right? I think you can see what's wrong with that. Also, I guess you, yeah. But like, you get what I mean, right? Like, the light needs to make sense. Like, visible sense. And right now it doesn't, because you have, like, white versus yellow. And also the placement of it. So that could be tweaked. Let's see. Any potential thoughts on the camera angles? Okay, so let's do the camera angles first. I think this is definitely the main one, right? I think it's a very interesting one. This feels a little bit weird, just because it's so light. If this was like dark, right, I probably wouldn't have minded it. But this feels like way too light, and it kind of distracts from like the separation between the layers, right? So what I sometimes try to do, or like what I in a lot of cases try to do, is like I have my foreground, midground, and background, right? And depending on where I want people to focus, like I'll have like a gradient going from like the foreground to the background or opposite, right? But there is like a clear separation between all the layers. So that would mean just make this a little bit darker. Then we have this angle. I'm not too big of a fan of this one anymore. I think if the contrast was bigger. Right, because this is something that we talked about last time as well. If you do the squint test, right? What are you gonna focus on this time? Because awesome job on diminishing the lights here, right? Because that was really distracting. But even now, right? If you squint your eyes, like, what do you see? Like, a lot of these lights, they're really bright. Is that just sticking through, like the window or something? It looks so weird. Maybe just make it nighttime outside. I don't think like this sort of angle is really worth showing off. The reason why I say that is because there's a lot going on in the interior, right? And that's the interesting stuff. Where if you wanted to do something like this justice from like an outside perspective, right? We would almost need to see like a couple of rooms, right? Where we can see the contrast of like, oh, all the other rooms are just basic, super stereotypical furnished apartments because no one really spends time in their apartment. But in all this chaos, like there's one apartment that just has like painting supplies and lots of paintings and all that stuff, right? Then you're trying to say something with the camera angle, right? Technically you could, I guess technically you could make the same argument here that it's showing like a cyberpunk world, but I don't think you really need to see the outside of it for that to be true, depending on the inside, right? I don't know. Also, there's also like a lot of detail missing from the windows, right? I think if you focus more of your attention to detail to the interior, I think you're gonna have a way better scene. For example, this one, right? There's a lot of stuff that you can really pull out. Like if you focus your attention to like these two, and you put a little bit more attention into the assets, right? The assets and the textures and how stuff looks here. I'll bring up like a couple of things. Like this looks like really dimmed. So there seems to be like no light coming outside from the screen, right? Even though that could be like a really nice thing to have that as like the main focus point, right? The keyboard looks really weird. Doesn't look like any keyboard at all, right? It kind of looks like a fake. It almost looks like a prop or something like that that you should only see in the distance. Like it doesn't really have any details to it. Missing details. Then also have a look at the chair as well. Like some of it is like really low poly compared to the desk, right? Like the desk has like a smooth edge. So I think there's enough polys on that one. But then comparing it to the chair is too low poly. Oh, especially comparing it to this guy. This guy is like nice and smooth. You can really see like the hard edges, and that's something that you probably want to avoid, right? What I would say is cut out this one and just focus your time on like the interior and making the interior look like really nice. Because the same can be said about the chairs as well, right? Like the chairs, they get used like a lot more geometry as well. Because right now the core shape is there, but you would probably want to have like a soft pillowy effect happening here too. Right, so that you get like soft effect happening here. And then also you could have like soft effect happening here as well. Right? And like really just making them look like real nice. Again, like this is basically all the same stuff, right? But where you're getting like weird issues with like normals or with the geometry, and it causes like the light to be reflected like in a really weird way. So for example, here as well, I think this is like a shading issue, right? Where this doesn't have like a hard edge. This doesn't feel like it. Plus also it's just a box, so giving it like paying attention to all those little details. I know that I'm kind of rambling on a little bit about this, but it's like, don't be afraid to add like a little bit more geometry and add like little rims to things, right? Like whenever a surface transitions from going flat to going upwards, like add a little lip. You know? Those details, like they really make a lot of difference. For example, this thing here, right? Even though it's a little bit low in geometry, Like this stuff makes a huge difference compared to the couch, right? It has like a nice transition. So yeah, that's the stuff that I would pay attention to. That's just a cube, I think. Yeah, it looks like one. So for sure, that's just a cube. But yeah, I would really pay attention to like all those details, right? Like all the hard edges that you have in your environment. Like that's, I would go through it and add like more geometry, right? Whenever you see like a hard edge, example here, you can see the geometry, add just a little bit more. Right? And I think with those two pictures, right? If we cut out this one, if you do a good job of like putting in like a focal point and you're trying to tell like a miniature story there, right? Could be like really interesting. These two shots, like they have potential. So I would really just go with them. Let's see. Yeah. That's about it. Where I love the changes that I'm seeing though. Like I love that you're trying to infuse it with a story, and I think your choice of going with like art in like a cyberpunk world has like a lot of potential, right? I think we're going in like a right direction with this one. Right, so this is like his art studio. So this is like his artistic side that we're seeing, right? My question for this screen, well, for this angle, is what side of this person are we seeing here? Is it also going to be like his artistic side, or do we maybe see that he's that they are really struggling with like making money in this world that's probably going to be dominated by like sentient AIs and like all that kind of stuff, right? Like how are they going to stand out in this world? Yeah. An additional question, is it okay to use royalty-free art to add some more paintings? The one I have or painted with a mouse and Substance Painter. Yeah. There's so many ways of approaching this, right? I think as long as you're not making money off of it, like you could do whatever you want with that, I think. So what I would do is I would honestly just focus on like a consistent art style, right? So that you so that you have paintings that are painted by like the same person, right? Try to focus on that. So yeah, just try to focus on like cohesive pictures. And then maybe throwing them into a filter, you know? Like a Photoshop filter or something like that. To kind of give them like a painterly look, depending on how good that looks. Usually doesn't look that great, to be honest, but yeah, but that's all I have to say about this one, McFell. It's a bit longer than I was thinking, but great job. I would just focus on like the core stuff that you have here, right? And yeah, keep it up. Okay, next up, Ricardo. Right, thanks a lot, and no worries. Ricardo. First of all, welcome to the community. Happy to have you here. And yeah, thanks for the feedback earlier as well. Let's have a look. I want to improve, since I always want to improve and start a dialogue on the process. Okay. Composition, set dressing, and storytelling. Feedback related to other subjects is welcome as well. Lighting and materials could also use some feedback. I think for this one, probably gonna stick to the storytelling. a little bit, right? Because that's the thing that you're drawing attention to, right? And I think your focal point is good, right? So there's like a good amount of attention being drawn to like something that is interesting, especially from a distance. I just think that once you get closer, that the payoff isn't worth like what you're trying to pull us into, right? And I mean that in terms of like a story that's being told, right? Like, why these lockers? Like, why these two? What's special about them, right? It could be cool to have like one of them open, and then maybe you see like someone's belongings or like personal stuff in it, right? Where you could kind of piece together a um a story from a student that that was there before, but now obviously isn't there anymore because the world kind of fell apart by the looks of it, right? You can make it as like dramatic or undramatic as you want, right? But I think something like that could add like a lot of depth to your scene. Whereas at this point, it's more like an asset showcase, right? But it doesn't really have like a storytelling to it yet. So yeah, the main thing is like, whose locker is it? And why, right? It depends on what kind of story you want to tell. But one thing that could be really interesting, or one thing that came to mind, to me at least, is that this locker door is open, right? Or like, well, you kind of have the door here, right? So let's imagine that this entire thing is just open. There's no door in it. And you can kind of see that the door is dropped on the floor. Then we're seeing like the internal structure of it, right? And like maybe there's still like a couple of books in there because you already have books, so that's probably going to be easy. Like a stack of books, and then maybe there's still like, I don't know, like a sweater or something hanging there, you know, from like the school. Let's say the school cheerleading team, you know. So we can kind of infer that like, oh, this is like cheerleader uniform or something like that, right? So now we're getting glimpses into like the life of this person here. And it doesn't have to be like neatly put inside of this little locker, right? We already have books down here. So yeah, might as well build a link to the books that are inside of it too, right? And then maybe add like more papers on the floor as well, like you're doing. And then maybe like a typical thing, right? Like have like pictures on the inside so that we maybe see like this girl and her friends, right? On like very mundane school stuff. And then I don't know, something else at the top of it, right? But you get what I'm trying to do here, right? Like I'm trying to infuse this whole thing with a story. And now it becomes more interesting, right? Because we're basically looking at like a locker that's like a time capsule into the life of this person that we're looking into. Um, Obviously, the way that this has been scattered around kind of needs to make sense, right? So you could have like the books a little bit more scattered. You could have like the t-shirt maybe still in there, but maybe like the pom-poms, you know, like the pom-poms are like back here for whatever reason. What else would they have? Let's have a look. Let's have a quick glance. Locker interior. It's a little bit kitsch, but hey, let's have a look. I mean, yeah, you can make it complex, like as complex as you want to, right? You could have something like this, where there's just like little markings on the side of it. Let's actually just heal that. So yeah, you could have little markings. You could have like a couple, like a ton of books in there, maybe another stack of books, and then maybe just like a couple of paper bags to, I don't know. Oh, that could be actually an interesting one. Have like a paper bag that could have been lunch at a certain point, but it's kind of like moldy and rotten at the bottom, so that's like a time indication of how long that has been there, you know? You could do some really interesting stuff with this. Like moldy food. Books. Slash folders. Writing on the door. Then personal pictures. I'll bring up an example as well, because I just thought about like somebody who's like really, well, like who I just keep reminding myself that they're like really good at doing this stuff. Hamish Ames. Let me bring him up. Bim is saying maybe some crumpled papers or notes. Yep. 100%. You could put that in there too. And specifically, oh, that's new. So now we get a transition on our station. It's way better than before. So yeah, just looking at this, right? Like it's a backpack. I mean, it has some complexity to it, but it's not like the craziest complex thing that you've ever seen, right? But even from this, like looking at the contrast, right? Like the little girl's backpack, but then like surrounded by like drugs and like stuff that you would normally not associate with like a little girl's backpack, right? And then also this one, the safe house. Like it's basically just like a capsule of like, if you start diving into this stuff, right? If you were to look at all the stuff here, you get a lot of hints and like personality attachments of like, oh, these people are trying to do this, right? But then they also still have like the little picture of their kid on the left, you know? And then there's like hints about like an infection being spread. So maybe like a flyer on the floor that could kind of give a hint to that, but it's not so obvious, right? So people have to start looking. This stuff is awesome, right? Like the more of these subtle things that you're trying to combine together, like it's gonna be really, really interesting. Yeah, like one of these pictures like could literally be like a flyer to prepare for whatever, right? Like a prep flyer. Yeah, this is how I would approach it when it comes to the storytelling. So I'm probably gonna stick with this. I'll give one more hint before we go. I'll go on to the next one. Is this sort of thinking, right? That is really story-driven focused. You can also do the same thing when it comes to the actual creation of the assets and the textures as well. So for example, maybe you don't have like the door ripped off completely, but it's like bent open, right? So that could kind of give a hint towards like scavengers looking around for like valuables in the school for whatever, like maybe meds or something like that, you know? just really desperate times for the people that are still around in this world. Could give a hint to that as well, right? And it doesn't always have to be like on the nose. Yeah, but I'll leave it there, Ricardo. I hope that helps. Just gonna shrink this down. And I think honestly, with the setup that you have then, right, you're pulling people into something that is worth exploring, right? Because they're trying to figure out like a mental puzzle, like who was here, like what are the different pieces of the puzzle that I can bring together. So yeah, it's up to you to give people that puzzle, right? Let them come up with it. Thanks a lot. I'm gonna work on this and decide what the story is gonna be. Hell yeah. Awesome. Hey designer, I'm good. How are you doing? Welcome back. Cool. Next up, we got Brandom. Oh, yeah. So, Ricardo, thank you so much for posting your work. And again, welcome to the community. Oh, we'll definitely post new whip soon. Hell yeah. Awesome. Feedback on texturing for a Brandom. Then also you're running into like a little issue with the glass, right? Like a refraction index of like 1.53, which is, according to real measurements, that's what you want to have for glass, right? I just wouldn't do that for glass. It always looks weird. I keep my index of refraction at 1 unless I have like a very specific use case where I actually use the geometry of the glass to have like a different index of refraction, right? But as you can see, it doesn't look good. So this actually brings up an interesting point that I wanted to highlight as well, is if this doesn't look good, right? Like throw out like all the real world measurements, because we're still doing PBR, right? Which stands for physically based rendering, which means that it's not physically accurate. So as long as we don't get there, we're not dealing, well, even then, like we still need to have like an artistic touch and decide like, hey, look, this doesn't look good, so I'm gonna deviate from what I would perceive to be like the real world measurements or whatever, right? So if it doesn't look good, set it to 1. And then maybe try another approach. Try to add like more dirt on it or something like that, right? Okay, really good to know. Yeah. Feedback on the texturing. So I do have to say some stuff about this, but I kind of want to... You did share like a GIF, right? But that unfortunately doesn't really make it more easy for me to draw over. So I just clipped like two angles. Let's see. Oops, sorry. No, that's okay. That's okay. I made it work. I'm trying to think. Because there is a weird issue happening here, right? And this is very stereotypical when you do like any metal texturing, is that you have like a lot of... I think you're trying to go for like some sort of oxidization, right? Something like that. But usually you run into issues where if you have a metallic texture that goes to like a non-metallic surface, the mask for that is always going to have like this weird edge, and it's going to look really weird. So the transition here just doesn't really look correct. And I don't, at this point, I can't remember what the workaround for that is. It's been too long since I did like any sort of texturing like this. Yeah. Let's have a look at some of the other stuff. So these things, they feel too new. They feel like pristine, right? Like the same can almost be said about these two guys as well. And I feel like this is gonna take a lot of time. I'm just gonna say it up front. This is gonna take a lot of time to get it looking really good, because I'll probably bring this up like every stream that we do, right? Like texturing is based on like lots of layers that have been built up over time by different sort of interactions that happened with this object, right? So with something that's been cobbled together with different pieces, like you're gonna have like lots of layering, right? Because first of all, we have the base layering, right? So let's take one example, right? I'm gonna try to isolate it. So if we take if we take like the USB stick, right? If we just take that one, or maybe a better example here. Yeah, so for example, the USB stick, right? What you're gonna have here is, first interaction is you're gonna have like your hands touching it, right? So your hands are gonna leave fingerprints, smudges, etc. Right? It's probably been dropped on the floor a couple of times, so we're gonna get some scratches. But even within scratches, like there's different kinds of scratches, right? So from daily use, you get some scratches, but they're gonna be different. I don't know, this is gonna get really nerdy real quick, right? Like you also have like scratches from like dropping it on the floor, right? Right, and then for example, the sliding mechanism. That's gonna be like its own layer of scratches. And then we now come to the more generic stuff, right? I kind of did it the opposite way around, which is my bad. I kind of went from like detailed to very generic. So it has to kind of be the opposite way around, right? If you were to texture it. But yeah, number 5 would be just dirt. Right, depending on how old it is, and depending on the technology that I'm seeing here, like this has been really old, so we'll probably get some like dirt just from age. And then we get, let's have a look, edge scratches as well, or edge damage. Etc. Right, you get the point. Like all this stuff is probably going to be like multiple layers that are going to be stacked on top of each other to make like the one thing look really good, right? Because that's the thing overall that we're getting now, is that you did like a good first pass, I would say. Like you're getting some very, especially on the headphones, right? Like this stuff looks really good for a first base. But now what I want to see is like all the ways that like this headphones has been interacted with, right? So like if I'm taking off my headphones, there's going to be like different interaction points and contact points. You have some rust here. Point it out later. But there's probably gonna be like dust in these crevices, right? So this area might be more dusty than like the top surface. So let's say you get some like top dust, and then maybe like a little bit of stuff leaked down here. You know what I'm saying? Like this layering is gonna take a lot of time if you want to make this look really, really good. And it's gonna take like lots of iterations and lots of attention to detail, right? And you're gonna have to apply that to like the tiniest little details, right? And pay attention to the tiniest little details. For example, there's probably, if this is baked down, you might want to have a look at like what's happening with this shape in the back, because it feels like this needs some geometry and this doesn't really have like any baking information on it whatsoever. I know that I'm just like pointing out like a whole bunch of stuff, right? Yeah, and some logical stuff, right? Like this goes into lights. Probably there's probably just gonna be like a little socket, right, that it goes into. Same thing with this guy here. It's probably gonna go into like a little socket. Same like this dude's, right? Like they're going into something. This stuff looks really nice though. Where there's like contact details. Like where stuff is interacting with each other always looks really interesting to look at, right? But then you have other areas where that isn't happening and it almost feels like these guys are just floating on top of the surface, right? So yeah, I would probably, if I were to do this, what I would do is do it in steps, right? Because this is like a very complex object. So step one would be like generic. So a generic pass on everything, right? And this is just like edge damage, dirt in the crevices, color variation, probably like a couple of layers of color variation. And just like maybe like a light layer of generic scratches, right? Maybe depending on the object. And then do like a specific pass. So this is where you look at like, okay, this section of the helmet is made out of this material, so I'm gonna treat it in this way. And like these are the contact points, like where you would see like scratches from like the headphones being adjusted, or like a couple of layers of tape being ripped off because they had to reapply the tape, like all that kind of stuff, right? Like that tells something about like how this person has interacted and gives life to this prop. And then the third step would be just to polish it all and bring it together. It's the way that I would approach it. But yeah, really paying attention to the small details. McFall is saying maybe you could take an image from a real motherboard and overlay it on top of the circuit board thingy. Yeah. Yeah, it feels like the motherboard section itself feels blockout-ish. Like it doesn't feel like there has been a pass, especially on these like connection pieces yet. Like it feels kind of basic at the moment. Where some of the other pieces they've had some, they have had like a little pass on them. Right? But yeah, it's a very complex thing. It's a huge undertaking, so take it slow. Do it very methodical, and really take it step by step, right? Leonardo is coming in. Welcome to the chat and saying, starting from the concept art of other people can help you break down lighting, composition, etc. before going ham and doing your own design. Oh yeah, this is based on a concept art. I just don't have it on the screen right now. But first you focus on the technical part with guardrails. Yep. Brandom is saying, I've thought of it, but I want to refrain from using other people's images to cover anything. I want it all from scratch. You don't necessarily need to go into that kind of mindset. I'm just gonna throw that out there, right? Like an image of like a motherboard is not gonna cost you any points because you still have to make it look like it actually is a part of your piece, right? Like you still have to like add all the layers on top of it anyway to like properly like massage it into how you want it to look. Does that make sense? So you're not just like ripping like an image and you're putting it on there and then it's like, okay, cool, done. You know, you're gonna layer things on top of it as well. It's almost like if you were to sculpt your own wood, right? And then using someone else's brush. Like you're not gonna be like, nah, I want to make everything from scratch. I'm not gonna use alphas, no brushes, like none of that, right? It's kind of, I know where it's coming from. Trust me, I know where it's coming from. I'm still struggling with that in like a different perspective, but yeah, you don't need to put on these like unnecessary guardrails for yourself. What I'll say. But that being said, I feel like there's a big improvement from last week already, Brandom. So I'm really curious to see how this is gonna continue. And also, your lighting setup, even though it's not perfect yet, it's leaps and bounds from what we saw last time. So if this momentum keeps up, and if you're gonna keep improving it on that same sort of level, I'm really curious where this is gonna be in like a couple of weeks. Like I'm excited for it, you know? So keep it going. All right, next up. I like the improvements on the tape. Yes, designer, 100%. The tape, especially the back parts, right? Where we're seeing like actual deformation and we're getting like different sections of the tape and like this kind of stuff. Looks freaking awesome. So yeah, props where props are due, Brandom. Keep it up. Karim! Let's have a look. Karim is working on a construction site. My painter file is suffering, but I'll keep pushing. Yeah, last tip maybe on that front. It depends on how you approach it, right? But with my technique, where you focus on the more generic things first, this could potentially work out. That you work in a lower resolution, and then at the end, for exporting, you just export it in a high resolution. Might save you some pain. I think some of the textures definitely... Oh, this is about Karim's work, by the way. So I think some of the textures definitely have some room for improvement, and I would love to have your opinion / take on them. Okay, we're going to be looking at textures. First impression is pretty good. I like the reflective tape and how that looks. I really like that. Let's see. Let me point out some stuff here. So I think the height intensity is too intense on how high or like how intense the normals or the height is when it comes to like the letters and like the caution and all that kind of stuff, right? It feels like really intense. So the reflective tape, that's looking quite nice. What you could do, right? There's like a little thing to push it. Maybe have it like slightly peeled off. Sounds like a little suggestion, you know, that you have like a slight peel coming off. Look interesting. I like these scratches. It's almost like it got hit by a car like a couple times. Oh, there's another question that I have here. Like, how is this? Because you have these nice bolts, right? Like for connecting it with like the back frame, but like how is this connected? Would they potentially do it with like the same bolts? Let's have a look. Yeah, the rest of it looks quite nice. Like the barrier I do like. I think the barrier looks really cool. This guy looks really nice as well. So on this one, I'm wondering the same thing. But it's not as bad as with the other one. Like with the normals, right? So I wonder if it's like slightly too hard. Like there's a transition from like the cone to like the white part, right? Like how intense that separation is. They do have like a thicker sort of separation going into the cones, right? But I wonder if it's still like slightly too harsh. The rest of it looks quite good. Really nice. Like the reflectivity, right? Like the roughness, how it varies between each piece, and then you have like more dirt at the bottom. This is awesome. Let me have a quick look at some of the high-res images here. Because I'm just having a look at like the bevel side. Because it might be that to add like a little bit more of detail is that you increase the bevel here slightly, so that we're actually getting like a bit more of the light being caught on like the rim, right? The rest of it looks really nice when it comes to the bevels, right? Like it kind of makes sense here. We have like a thicker bevel, but it feels like that same sort of thickness can be applied here as well. Yeah. Let's see. Barriers are quite nice as well. Lighting on this scene doesn't really help. It kind of makes this one feel really weird. I'm kind of wondering if there's anything going on with like the normals, like if they're inverted or something. Like if it feels really, really weird. That one. But it might also just be the lighting. Designer is saying, I think that the legs of the barrier are too damaged compared to the rest. And it feels like it will need to be damaged less on top. Oh, okay. That's actually a good point. Yeah, it's especially the rust. It's kind of hard to see. It is an interesting one, right? Because I do agree with what you're saying. I do think there is something there. But you could potentially make the argument that the legs are always reused and the frame, like the frame pieces, are just like newly attached onto it. You know? I think, however, to add to your point, right? If you have like a couple of them next to each other and you have like such an intense amount of noise and rust going on, it's gonna be very noisy real quick. So I think I still agree with your point to make it like less noisy. Oh yeah, that will make sense. But it's I think your point is still more important than me trying to come up with like a piece of logic for it, you know? That's the way that I would approach it. And then let's see here. I think it's the same happening here, like the rust normal feels too intense. Because you can clearly see that it has like a big ridge where you probably want to have like smaller transition going between the pieces, right? What also frequently happens, let me see. I'm trying to think. Like I'm trying to think about my interactions as like a student with like large containers, because I know they had like a lot of scratches going. Let me have a look. Let's get an old container in here. Probably the ones that we were using then. Interesting. Oh, yeah. But there is something that I was missing. I think if you want to make these guys stand out a little bit more, right? Let's have a look. You got some spray paint on there. What they always have is like they have like measurements and like the amount of tons that it can take, right? And then also like a little bit of branding on it. So, what do you call that? Like, measurements, branding, and then also, interestingly enough, color variation spots, like where people have repaired it, they look really interesting. A couple of these spots. Adding decals will make it. Yeah, adding some decals on top of it, that would be cool. This is basically all just decal work, right? I think you got a solid base here. I think maybe even adding some of these like slight variations to like the geometry, right? To not make it like, because it kind of looks like it has seen some stuff, right? So adding like slight variations, like slight dents occasionally could definitely help sell that feeling too. And it just needs to be like very subtle, right? Just make a couple of cuts, push in like a slight dent, and then you're good to go. And then texturing wise, I think you can also have like a couple of easy wins when apparently like the pillars on the corners, they take like a lot of the brunt of the damage, right? Like that we're seeing here. So I think you could definitely go for like more damage on the pillars. And then in comparison have potentially like just like a more generic type of like roughness variation across the board. So that it's not damage, but like it has smudges and like all that kind of stuff on, right? That's the way that I would probably approach it. To give it like more, like a more interesting surface to look at. Now let's see on the barriers. I think the barriers actually look quite good. Maybe making it pale a little bit. Yeah, that could also work. Like just adding like a little bit of like sun bleaching in there or something like that. Yeah, definitely work. Well, like even cranking up like the amount of dirt that's going to be in like the crevices, right? Like these areas, because they're like inside of it, right? They're going to capture like a little bit more dirt than the exterior. Let's have a look at the barrier. I think the barrier's pretty good. I think, again, being careful with the intensity of the normal map, right? The reason why I keep hammering on this is because it makes everything feel like really noisy. And I think noise can be a good thing, but like try to use it in parts where you wanna like attract people to certain things, right? And I think noise only works when it is used in when it's used sparingly. So what that means in this case would be the larger sections, right? They have no normal variation whatsoever. But then the sections, so for example, if we look at this section, right? Let's say all this stuff like has minimal normal variation. And then once we get to these parts, right? That's where we get like the normal variation that you have right now. Makes sense? So that we get noise, but the noise is more localized around like the damaged areas rather than everything else. And you can still have like the surface bubbling up and all that stuff, right? Just from like it's being painted on concrete, so it's not going to be like an even surface. But try to match the intensity to where the damage is going to be. That would be like my 2 cents. Oh. So intense normal around like damaged areas. That's the way that I would approach it. Nice little Karim. Hope that helps. I'm gonna share these pictures with you later. And then we're gonna jump onto Thomas. Thomas B. Thomas didn't really ask for any specific feedback, so I'm gonna keep it like very lightweight, and I'm gonna do like a little quick overpaint here. Well, say overpaint, but I'm just gonna go in. Let's see. What are we doing? Okay, so dodging is making it brighter. I keep forgetting this, like every time. Right, so we do a little bit of that. Maybe we let the background come a little bit more to life. Because I think the background does add like an interesting contrast to the whole thing. And what I'm gonna do is this needs to be... And then the closer you get to the altar, like the more intense those lights get. What you can also play around with is what I'm seeing here on the floor, right? Is you have these like wet puddles. Probably a good idea to have more around the staircase and then have less around here, because it's a good way to kind of get like more light into your scene and kind of use like the reflection of them to give the impression that there's like more light in that area. So this is also something, I'll give you an example from a recent piece, or like, well, my medieval scene that I'm working on. So I love to do this a lot. Like whenever I have a spot that I want people to pay a little bit more attention to. See how I'm using like the reflection of like the puddles? Like it's literally there to take you from like the center of the frame towards like the guy like with his little cart, right? Obviously there's other supporting elements that he's like a contrasting element versus the entire scene, right? But even if we take him out of the picture, this is like an older version of the same screenshot. You can kind of see what that does, right? It kind of creates like a bright element in the scene that can then take you, well, take your eye by the hand. Don't know how this works, but let's go with it. You can then take your eye by the hand and it can kind of drag you into the scene a little bit more, right? I love to do this. I probably do this like quite a lot in this scene specifically. I mean, it's all variations of like the same scene, right? You can even see in like a shot like this where like the values haven't been tweaked yet, right? So everything kind of has like the same sort of value range, like even making the puddles like shine a little bit more, like it's kind of like a good it creates leading lines inside of your composition, right? So you could do something like that here as well in your environment too. Yeah, so this is the thing that I've done. right? So just remove this. Let me enforce it like a little bit more. Oh shit, I'm making it brighter again. Damn it. Well, actually work. It could actually work. You know, because at this point, like the focal point is so well lit that making the foreground like lighter isn't really that big of a deal in comparison, right? Also, look at the top right of my screen, and this navigator thing like helps you a lot with that as well, where you can kind of see that, you know, like if we look at it in really small terms, like up here, like it doesn't really seem to have like a big impact, right? And then once we start doing this, it's way better, right? So again, just like driving the focal point home, I would even say that I kind of did it too much. Let me actually try this again, because I think if we're a little bit more careful with how we apply this, I think it could be cool to have like the background stand out, and then go for like a bigger guy. Yeah, something like that, right? It's all about bringing out like the focal point. Bringing out the focal point, making sure that what you're trying to highlight in the scene comes into play a bit more, right? And then, you know the puddles that we talked about before? Let me try something here. Because I'm thinking, let's see. What if you kind of give like the inclination that there's like footsteps, right? So that we're kind of following like this person's footsteps. And maybe they left the other way, you know? What about scattering some small rocks on the floor? I don't think the scene honestly needs it. I think the floor looks actually pretty interesting as is, right? We're getting like small details, we're getting small noise. So I don't think it needs too much more, to be honest. I think if you want to add some small rocks, the area that I would do it is in the transition from these guys, from like these grass clumps to like bridge the gap between these areas, right? But the core path doesn't really need it. I think I would just focus on like getting footsteps in. Um just to enhance the storytelling, right? And to enhance the storytelling, to increase the leading lines going towards like the section here, or like to the main focal point, right? And I think it also does a good job of like giving an indication of like someone actually dropped the sword there, and it was kind of like him saying goodbye to war, right? To like fighting for a country that it doesn't believe in, or whatever story you want to make of it, right? Maybe he's just retiring. You allow people to speculate through it. But it gives a link between the sword and whoever dropped it, right? That's why I think the footsteps could be interesting. Yeah. I would... This is more like an experimental thing. What I would potentially try with these lanterns is have like more of them surrounding the background here. So you kind of deviate from what's like stereotypically known, right? Or how they're stereotypically built, but almost turn this into like a shrine almost. I would potentially try that out. I don't know if that's a good idea and it's gonna work, but I would really want to give that a try. So that we have like a lot of light in the center of the scene. I don't know. It kind of turns it into like a bit more of a fantasy scene rather than like a realistic scene, right? But it'd be an interesting one to try. Okay, Thomas, thank you so much for posting your work. Thank you so much, designer, for all the good suggestions as well. I appreciate them. And I think that's gonna do it for this week, guys. So I'm gonna leave it here. If you want to check out some more resources, go check out our website, beyondextent.com. Or if you just enjoy being here on YouTube, share it with your friends, give us a like, subscribe for more of this stuff, and go enjoy like our other workshops. We have like a lot of really cool workshops that we've done, and we're currently working on the batch for next year. So I'm really excited about this. I think next year is gonna upload this year out of the water. So yeah, I'm really excited for that. But I'm gonna leave it there. I wish you all a nice evening. Stay creative, and I'll see you Friday or next week. We'll see. Speak to you later. Bye. Yes, Brandom is saying awesome work, everyone. Hell yeah.